was about 14 years old, my father took us tubing at a river. So it had this little area of rapids and then a big flat water area below the rapids. And we're, of course, going through it, having a great time. And at some point, I see my dad kind of down in the flat part, and he's just laying on the tube, and his toes are dangling, almost touching the water. And I don't know what put this in my head to do it, but I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I snuck up underwater, swam all that way, and just, I don't know if you've ever seen somebody jump up off of an inner tube before. The science doesn't seem to work, but it is humanly possible. My poor dad, he's a great dad. I don't know what he did to deserve that, but we still laugh about the story. I laugh harder than he does, of course. Sneak attacks have been a thing of warfare and father-son relationships since the beginning of time. You can go back to the Trojan horse. You can go to Pearl Harbor, the 6 Days War in the Middle East. There's all of these different battles that have this kind of surprise element to them. Sun Tzu in The Art of War says, all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when you are able to attack, we must appear unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far. When far, make them believe we are near. I love sneak attack stories. They have kind of a David and Goliath sort of element to them. They're sort of the underdog that against all odds is able to just barely win that victory just based on the fact that it was done in surprise. I think one of my favorite battles of such is the Battle of Hastings in 1066 in northern England. Harold Godwinson was king at the time, and he heard news that 300 Norse ships had landed in the north. He took 15,000 soldiers, and when I say soldiers, that might be a grand word. These soldiers were largely tribal militias, volunteers, and peasants. He took 15,000 soldiers and in 4 days marched them 200 miles. Think about that, 200 miles, marched them there, and found all of the Norsemen kind of sunning themselves, picnicking, relaxing, never imagining that any army in the world would have traveled that far, that fast. And so this near peasant army attacks them, kills thousands of them, and only 24 ships were able to escape. This morning, we're going to move into Matthew chapter 25, and Jesus tells us 3 stories, and each of these stories presents an event that catches people unaware. It's almost a surprise attack, if you will. He has just warned them that he will be returning at a time when no one is expecting, like the flood in Genesis, or like someone breaking into a house at a time when they least expect it. Kind of like those Norsemen sitting on the shores, just sunning themselves and picnicking. Jesus is using in this chapter 25, he's using a kind of circular storytelling method. I've talked about that before. He's used this before in Matthew. He's used it in Luke, where he'll tell 3 stories kind of in a chain. And when he does that, he's trying to make sort of a singular point, and these stories are illustrating that central concept there. And so I want to read, starting in verse 1, chapter 25. It says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps, and they went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. For the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oils with their lamps. And the bridegroom was delayed, and they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, 'Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him.' All those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise answered, saying, 'Since there will not be enough for us and you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourself.' And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterwards the other virgins came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he answered, 'Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. The kingdom will be like.'" He starts this phrase. A lot of people take different stories that Jesus tells and they kind of turn them into allegories. And so in an allegory, if you were looking at this story from that lens, you'd say, well, what do the virgins mean? What do the lamps mean? What does the oil mean? The sleep, the delay, the closed door. You try to attach a kind of meaning to all of these things. One such interpretation of this passage says, well, the virgins are the Jewish scholars, and the lamps are the Torah, and the oil is the good deeds. And so the foolish virgins are the Jewish scholars who study the Torah but fail to produce good deeds. But this makes good deeds the basis of entering the kingdom, right? It also makes a statement against the Torah that Jesus never seemed to have an anti-Torah standpoint. Also, what authorizes you to say these things mean that? Does the oil mean good deeds, or could it mean the Holy Spirit or Jesus or something else, right? And so this is the problem with creating an allegory, is it's kind of just sort of your own interpretation. Allegories are dangerous and unnecessary, but I think stories, they invite us to peer into a house. It's sort of like if you ever get to go away to a nice location where it's pretty and has views out the different windows. You sit in each room and you look out the windows and you kind of get a different vantage point as you sit there. And so stories invite us to do the same thing. Scene by scene, person by person, we kind of sit in their shoes, sit in their chair, and we look at the rest of the scene around us, and we're able to kind of get a feel for what is happening. Verse 1, he talks about the bridegroom, this being a wedding for a bridegroom. There's a rich Old Testament history of God and his people being pictured as a bride and bridegroom together. One of the most dramatic chapters in the Bible, Ezekiel 16, pictures Israel as this wayward bride that this groom loves very much, and kind of scoops up and protects and makes her his bride. And then this bride is unfaithful. And so the rest of the chapter is all about the unfaithfulness and the rejection that the groom felt. Isaiah 62:5 says, as the bridegroom rejoices over you, the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. As the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. So there's clearly this language all throughout. There's quite a few examples of this in the Old Testament. There's this language throughout the Bible of God as the bridegroom loving his people as the bride. And here Jesus is picturing himself as the bridegroom, which for us is not a problem, but can you imagine a Jew hearing that, where he's taking on actually a kind of divine language, if you will, the fact that God in the Old Testament is the one saying, I am the bridegroom, and here in this story, it's pretty clear Jesus is talking about himself. But he goes through the story, and there's 2 groups, 10 women, but 2 groups of women. 5 of them are foolish, and 5 are wise. They had those little lamps that hold a little bit of oil and have a wick inside of them, and so the 5 foolish ones brought the lamps only. Now, it says they brought no oil, but I think with the wise ones, they brought flasks of oil. So I think it just means they came with it already burning, right? They came with it already burning, but then there's this other group of women who bring flasks of oil with them, understanding that this might be longer than they are imagining that it would be. In fact, that's exactly what happens. The bridegroom is delayed. He's delayed so long that they fall asleep. Now, here it's important to make a distinction between weddings in North America in our time that we have seen versus weddings in the ancient Near East, in both Bible times and in modern times. At my own wedding, Christy and her family was up at like 4:30, 5 a.m., something ridiculous like this. And they're doing all of the preparations that happen on that side, makeup and hair and dress and getting everything ready for the time. And then the ceremony happens, and all of the parents are escorted down the aisle, and all the grooms and the groomsmen, they come out. The bridesmaids are escorted down. Everything's set, and then the music changes. The crowd stands. Everyone turns and looks, and there she appears, and she comes down the aisle. My morning that morning was, I rolled out of bed around 9:30, 10. Went to my favorite taco truck. I had a great day. I know half the room is hating me right now. And I was like, yeah, get you know who you are. Oh. But Middle Eastern weddings are an entirely different event. There's the first woman in Finland to earn a PhD in philosophy. Her name is Hilma Granqvist. She lived, this was in like the 1920s, it was Palestine at the time. lived there, and she wrote about, she was an anthropologist, and she lived amongst the people, and she wrote several books. I read the one this week that she wrote about the Palestinian weddings. And what was fascinating to me was, okay, that's 100 years before my time in the Middle East, and one country over, right? I was in Egypt, she was in Israel now, and the number of parallels, one between our two examples and the other between the biblical story, it's uncanny. So I'm going to tell the stories I have because they're from my own experience, but I just want you to understand this is kind of cross-checked with Jewish culture and Arab culture, and it's cross-checked across time. When we lived in Egypt, I was able to be on both sides of the wedding party. Their weddings are elaborately different. The first one that I was part of, I was on the bride's side, and so I was friends with her brother, and they invited me. So I showed up hours and hours before this event was supposed to have happened. And essentially, we're at their house just hanging out. And since it's, Muslim culture is very segregated, guys and girls, us as the guys, we're just off in some side room talking, drinking tea, just kind of waiting. And then at this very random time, out from nowhere, I hear gunfire. I mean, a lot of it. Gunfire breaks out in the street. Now, the Texan side of me switches a gear, okay? You can imagine which gear that is, and I start running through a number of scenarios in my head. And no one else in the room seems at all concerned, right? And so we kind of rush out onto the balcony, and there's this convoy of cars that has just pulled up in the street, and there's guys outside with pistols. Mind you, this is Cairo, 20 million people, okay? So imagine like New York City or Chicago in the middle of the city. I guess that's not hard to imagine, but imagine it in connection with a wedding, okay? Not only that, all the buildings are right off the street and they go straight up, so the sound just doesn't escape. All of this gunfire. Now, this is part one. The groom has shown up. And now we all convoy together to another location, and this is always done at rush hour. You want the most people seeing you, and the fact that there's that many people on the road is proof to you that you chose the right time. And so then you show up, and then the actual wedding, as we understand, takes place. I also had a chance to be on the male side of it when one of my friends himself was getting married. And so I got to see the other side. We got to show up with the guns. That was a lot of fun. And we start at his house, all of his friends show up, everybody's ready, and we load up in cars and we're driving through the city. Now, I'm in a car I'm probably not supposed to be driving, and I know that because they told me I'm not supposed to be driving that car. And there's these kids in the car, like half of his family is in my little tiny car, and they unroll the windows, and they start hanging outside of the car. And now, we're on the highway, but you can't think highway speeds. You have to think like 5 miles an hour because it is traffic time. And they're like shouting at the cars, and they're saying, Brian, honk the horn. And so what they want me to do is for the hours that it takes us to get through the city to go honk, 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 honk. And that's fun for about that long, and then I'm kind of done, right? This is not my tradition. And I don't know, Brian, keep going. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be a long ride. But other cars, they get excited, they flash the lights with us, they honk their horn. I mean, the whole city, as we come in contact with it, celebrates. And then we just descend on this poor girl's house in mass, and she's supposed to kind of know when we're gonna be there, sort of be ready, but there's so many variables. What if we got stuck in traffic for a long time? And then we show up, and it's the same thing. They're super shocked that we're there because there's gunfire in the streets. And then we all go to another location, and then the party goes to like 2 or 3 in the morning. So take that information that you now know, that it's not a wedding ceremony built around the bride and her dress and her grand entrance to kind of her own ball, but it's a very different story of the groom is supposed to go and collect the bride at kind of an appointed time, but also you never really know when anything's happening in this kind of environment. And so there's this arrival. The arrival is when? He says at midnight. It happens so late that everyone has fallen asleep. And this is where you start seeing the two different ways of being, the foolish way and the wise way. Here's where you see their paths, they split off from each other. He's already indicated in the previous story that he told in chapter 24, he's already indicated, hey, if I tarry a while, right? If my return takes longer than expected, you need to be found being faithful. And he hears a story about a groom taking a little bit longer than was maybe expected. So he arrives. There's a shout. The bridegroom is here, right? This is party time. It's happening. This is no more talk. The deal is on. We are in motion. Everything is happening. 1 Corinthians talks about this in a similar way. 1 Corinthians 15:52 says, in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. Paul also says in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of a trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. There's this event of Christ returning that's going to happen in a moment. This is what he's been teaching. This is what his stories are illustrating, is just like a bridegroom shows up, and you better be ready. Everyone better be ready to go, because that's when it's happening. That is how his return is going to be. It's out of this that we see some very dramatic responses unfold. We see near chaos unfolding. The cry goes out, here he is, the bridegroom. Then those virgins rose and they trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out. See, they had oil in the lamps already. They just didn't bring extra. These are the girls who are going to be part of the procession leading from the united two parties to wherever the wedding is actually going to occur. They're expected to light the way, to lead the way. And how are they going to do that if their lamps are out? All the ladies, they trim their lamps, they trim up the wick to make it burn the brightest. And now the foolish ones begin to negotiate. Hey, we need some oil. Give us some. Our lamps are burning out. The wise say, sorry. But no, if we give you some, how will we have some for ourselves? Go out and buy some. So they go out to buy some, but by the time they get back, the door is shut, the text says. There's kind of a parallel here to the story, to the flood story, right? When Genesis 7:16 says, those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God commanded them, and the Lord shut him in. The door is shut. There's no reopening it. This is actually the part of the story that's hard for me to believe. Having lived there and always seeing the late stragglers getting in no matter how late they show up, that's the part of the story that's hard to believe. But this is the part of the story that this is how God's kingdom is actually different from our kingdom, how his culture is different from our culture. Our culture, we try to find a way to sort of let everybody get the participation trophy. And that might work in the here and now, but in God's kingdom, things are going to be different. There's a time where we can think and analyze and choose and follow or not. But then there's a time when the door is shut. And here, this is at that wedding. They rush out to get the oil. They go to the market. They buy the oil. Even at this late hour, somebody's open. Someone sells them oil. Can you just imagine their urgency? That feeling of, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. We're late. But again, in this culture, most likely they would have been let in. But here it's different. Here they get there and the door is shut. Jesus has just referenced Noah and the days of Noah and how quickly the flood came in, how unexpected, how everything was just life as normal when the flood came. And he's compared his second coming to that. And here we see this language, the door is shut. He comes unexpectedly and then the door is shut. The time of decision is over. But then we see the bridegroom's response. They say, Lord, Lord, open to us. Matthew 7:21 says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. This is their plea. They're finally here. They're finally ready. They're late, but they're ready. Knocking on the door. Let us in. Here's his response. I don't know you. That might seem weird and harsh, right? How do you have a wedding party and half of the wedding party you go, well, when they actually show up, you go, oh, sorry, I don't know you. That seems weird. Why were they in the wedding party to start with? And some of this comes, I've talked about this before, how in small tribal cultures, how they tend to invite the entire populace, the entire neighborhood, tribe, village, whatever they're in. They sort of invite them to everything. It's expected that you say you're invited, but not everybody shows up. Or sometimes people might get mixed into things. He says, I don't know you. Their response here shows that this is not an allegory. Could the foolish virgins have found their way into the wedding party by simply being more prepared? If we were to apply this kind of to our own lives and say, well, is this the case of a Christian losing their salvation? If I'd only been more prepared, then when Jesus came back, then I would have gotten in, but I wasn't prepared, so I was a Christian, but now I'm not. See, you get into some weird territory here if you make this about the allegory of this is good works that they're supposed to do. It's not that at all. They're not earning their salvation by having been prepared. We don't earn our salvation by doing good works. The opposite is the result here. And we see that it's actually the root cause of all the drama. The foolish maidens are not known by the groom. That's the whole issue. They're outsiders or they're acquaintances, perhaps. But there's been a hint of this all throughout the story, that they were never really part of the party. We know this because they only appear to be known by the groom. They went through all of the right actions. They seem to be known by the groom, but their deeper actions proved that they didn't actually know him and he didn't know them. They had an outward show of being part of the party. They had the right clothes. They were in the right place. They were with the right people. They're holding a lamp. But they didn't truly know him, or else they would have been prepared. You see, their actions showed what the relationship actually was. This is not participation trophy time. This is not, well, you showed up and you're sort of just with the gaggle of people that are part of the wedding. At a certain point, it's sort of like being on a train. You can get onto a train without a ticket. But at some point, somebody comes by and says, I need to see your ticket, please. Why they don't do this before you get on the train is always a mystery to me. Seems like it's better just do that on the train because now you have a whole situation of you are giving a guy a ride for free and now you got to figure out what to do with him. But nonetheless, for some reason, this is the way trains operate. You can get on without a ticket, right? This wedding party, you can get in, you can just wander up. They're just outside waiting for this event to happen. People are loitering on the street going, oh, I walked by, I have a lamp. I thought I'd stand here with you. But that's very different than knowing the groom. That's different than the groom knowing them. And the clue in the story is, how prepared are they? Were they prepared to be a part of this event with the groom from the get-go? Or did they sort of just walk up and think, well, this looks like a fun lamp holding convention meeting randomly. It's like a flash mob on the street. This is a stern warning for those of us. Again, he's been warning again and again, people who look like they belong, the Pharisees who can talk the talk and walk the walk, but their hearts don't know God, and scarier, are not known by God. Jesus has been teaching this all throughout the Gospels, all throughout this gospel in particular. They didn't know the groom, and this is why they didn't prepare. The preparation is not what's earning them a place in there. It's what's demonstrating what's inside of their heart. For someone who knew the groom, they knew we have to prepare. This might be a long night. We better be ready. For those who didn't know the groom, they just think, well, I'll just be here. Uh-oh, I'm out of oil. Well, maybe I can knock on the door and they'll let me in. Verse 13, Jesus gives us a one-sentence application of his own story. Watch, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. Jesus has just been teaching this in chapter 24. Verse 36, he says, but concerning the day and the hour, no one knows, not the angels of heaven or the Son, but the Father only. In verse 42, therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. Verse 50, the master of the servant will come on a day when he does not expect, at an hour that he does not know. This is the message Jesus has been just pounding in. You don't know when this is happening. So you have to be ready. You have to be waiting. What does all of this really mean for us then? The obvious answer here is just to simply quote Jesus' words, right? Watch therefore, because you don't know the day, you don't know the hour. Watching in this story meant being ready and being prepared when the groom had shown up, even if it means that the groom is going to take a long time. And so my question for us is, how are you preparing for Christ's return? Maybe a follow-up question that has a little bit of an edge to it would be, what are you actually preparing for? We spend a lot of life preparing, right? Remember you're in high school and what do your parents say? Study hard, get good grades, you need to get into a college. All right, so I spend all my high school years preparing. I get into college, and what does everyone say? Hey, study hard, get good grades, network, make contacts, do some internships, join some clubs. That way you can get a good job. You get the job, and what do they say? Hey, we're glad you're here. Now you need the next level of certification. Hey, you're in your mid-20s now. You got to start thinking about retirement. Hey, you better start investing your money. You better start saving. You better start planning. And there's all of this life that starts happening. And I'm not putting down the real side of the life that we're living. But we spend so much focus on how to prepare for all of these other things with very little concern for this other question of if our end goal is the return of Christ, is God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. If that is our end goal, but all of our preparation is something else, look at the story and tell us, who are we like? You see, their preparations showed, did they know the groom or not? And how we are preparing might just be the key to showing, who do we know? Sometimes we're shocked. We're shocked to see people who go to church their whole life and at some point just sort of wander off. At some point, verbally, they say, yeah, this isn't for me. And we're blown away by it. But the tells are there all along. They live a life that is preparing for something other than the return of Christ. I'm not putting down regular everyday planning. I'm not saying if you have a retirement plan that somehow this is at odds with God's kingdom. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is there's a way to have understanding the needs of our own life, of paying our bills and even saving for the future. There's a way of understanding that of how are these decisions we're making advancing God's kingdom, but so often we make these two conversations entirely separate from each other. We prepare for all of these things in our life when Jesus comes back and says, okay, show me the oil that's in your lamp. What do you have on you? What are we going to show him? That's a hard question. We're super prepared, but are we prepared in the wrong thing? Have we taken time to think, how am I preparing for the return of Christ? What am I going to show? How am I going to show I actually know you? Not that our preparations earn our place. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the things that we're working towards, the things that we're preparing and planning for, it should be a mirror into our heart to show us what has been going on there, what is really at work here. And if we hold up that mirror and that mirror isn't reflecting Christ, that's a moment for us to pause. That's a moment for us to ask the question, well why not? Do I believe and I just have the wrong priorities in life? Am I making the wrong plans? Have I just simply been associated with the people who are at the right place on a Sunday and at the right time, and I learned the words to the song, and I learned how to read the scripture, but I'm not really here for it. This is what the text calls foolishness. Now, the point is not that Jesus is trying to kick people out. The whole goal of this story is not this excited scene. I'm sure if a Pharisee heard this story, they would have seen that door closing, and they would have been like, yes, got him. Aha. It's like when you have a professor and they're excited to knock points off of you. They're excited to throw that trick question on, and they just love it when they get everyone who misses it, right? That's the people we are used to. That's not the heart of our King. The heart of our King is he is yearning and he is longing for us. He is inviting, he is calling us to follow him, to participate with him. Jesus isn't trying to kick people out. Jesus says that God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him, the world might have life. That is what Jesus is here for. And yet, there still is a point of departure, right? There's a point where you're either on the boat before it leaves or you're not, where you either have your ticket or you don't. There's this point where you go, there's something inside of me where I've come to this place where I say, yes, I need Jesus, and I'm following Jesus. Jesus wants you to follow him. I say follow him, not believe in him. We talk a lot about belief, right? In our world, we separate our minds from so many things. I believe this, I think that. And then we live a life in any number of kind of ways, right? I believe there are certain foods that are unhealthy to eat, and I love to eat them. right? I have belief and then I have practice. I'm not talking about belief. There's a lot of people who say, yeah, I believe Jesus is a real person. I believe the Bible talks about his life. I believe that what he says is true. Okay, great. Are you following him or not? Jesus is inviting us to follow him. We're not just looking for people who know facts, people who join movements or who are congregants or attendees who show up to events. It will change your life if you live your life with the understanding that he is coming back at any time. If you live your life with the understanding of what I'm doing now is in preparation for a king and a kingdom that I can't quite see yet. I read the stories and I choose to believe them. I choose to believe them as true and to order my life around them, to instruct my life, to put them in alignment with what God is doing. But it's unseen yet. I don't know. I won't know until we know. But that is what I'm choosing. It will change your life if you live that way. One of the noticeable things about that decision is that what you are doing right now is that you are going to be preparing for his kingdom and for his return. Let me close this with a word of prayer. Jesus, we long for your return, but we don't want to be unwise. We don't want to be unwise and naive in terms of what does that mean? It is a day of joy, but also a day of reckoning. And so before we just jump on the excitement, Lord, we want to look inward. God, if you were to be standing here before us and say, okay, show me your plans, what would our plans tell you about our relationship with you? Would you look at our plans and say, okay, that plan, it shows that you know me. It shows that you are following in my footsteps. Or would our plans just show that we're just off doing our own thing, living our own life? God, I pray for discernment for us. Pray that you would be pointing out to us, what do you want us to change? How can we be prepared for your return? How do we show that we are bought into your kingdom, even though it is here but not really here yet? God, I pray that we would be found ready, that we would be found prepared, that we would be found wise. And that all of this is because we know you and you know us, Lord. You invite us into this. Help us to follow you, Lord. We ask this in your name. Amen.